Today we're diving deep into a country that's constantly topping those happiest in the world lists, a land of 1,000 lakes and even more saunas, Finland. But before we can appreciate the modern, independent Nordic powerhouse that Finland is today, we have to rewind the clock. And let me tell you, Finland's history is an absolute masterclass in walking a tightrope between powerful neighbours. It's an incredible story of identity, resilience, and eventually, total independence. Ready to jump in? Let's go. For a really, really long time, the geographical area that would become Finland was essentially a political vacuum. Think of it as prime real estate that everyone wanted a piece of, sitting right at a major crossroads. On the west, you had Sweden with its connection to Western Europe and the Catholic Church. On the east, you had Novgorod, or early Russia, and its Greek Orthodox Church. It was a cultural and political tug-of-war right here. By the middle of the 12th century, Sweden managed to pull harder. They spent centuries establishing their dominance. And a major peace treaty in 1323 basically drew the line, assigning only the very eastern part, Karelia, to Novgorod, which meant the vast majority of the land, aka the western and southern parts, became deeply tied to the Swedish realm and the Western European way of life. This is where Finland's unique dual identity begins to form. For over 600 years, the Swedish legal and social systems became the bedrock of life here. Because unlike many places in Europe at the time, feudalism never really took root in Finland. The Finnish peasants were never serfs. They always retained their personal freedom. Imagine that. A level of personal liberty that was rare for centuries. So during this long era, the city of Turku quickly grew into the most important centre. Then the 16th century hits and the Reformation happened. The Bishop of Turku, a key figure named Mikael Agricola, brought the Reformation to Finland and created written Finnish, translating the New Testament in 1548. And by 1642, the entire Bible followed. Okay, so the language, which had been primarily oral, now had a standardized published form. As Sweden grew into a major European power in the 17th century, consolidating its control, its administrative grip tightened further, and the position of the Swedish language was strengthened. But you know how history goes. Great powers eventually fade, and external pressures mount. By the early 18th century, Russian pressure became overwhelming. During the 1808 to 1809 war with Sweden, Russia conquered the land. This is where the story pivots. Because under Sweden, Finland was just a collection of provinces. But when it was joined to Russia in 1809, the enlightened Russian Emperor Alexander I made it an autonomous Grand Duchy, which means the Russian Emperor was the Grand Duke. But the local governance was surprisingly homegrown, handled by a Finnish staffed Senate that reported directly to the Emperor. This autonomy, granted in 1809, is what unintentionally set the stage for the creation of the Finnish state itself. With this new freedom, the national identity blossomed. Helsinki was made the capital in 1812, and slowly but surely, the Finnish language was gaining ground, culminating in a major step in 1863, when a decree began the process of making Finnish an official administrative language. They got their own legislature, the Diet, back in session in 1863, and even their own army in 1878. This growing Finnish identity alarmed Russia, and the policy known as Russification, which is the obliteration of Finnish separatism, began in waves. Fortunately, the Finns were ready. So when the 1905 revolution broke out in Russia, it gave Finland a brief window for radical reform. And in 1906, they moved to a unicameral parliament with universal suffrage. Or in other words, Finland went from a slow, class-based legislature, where only a few wealthy men could vote, to a single, modern democratic body, where every adult citizen, including women, had an equal vote and the right to be elected. But you want to know what cemented their move to independence? It was the chaos of World War I and the Russian Revolution. So, on December 6, 1917, the Parliament approved the Declaration of Independence, only for the celebrations to be cut short. The deep breach between the political left and right led to a brutal civil war in early 1918. Government troops led by General Gustav Mannerheim won, and by the summer of 1919, Finland was established as a republic. That's why the 1920s was all about healing and rebuilding, gradually incorporating the political left back into government. Then the dark clouds of the late 1930s returned. The Soviet Union, now aligned with Germany, demanded military bases. Finland refused, and on November 30th, 1939, the USSR attacked. This was the legendary Winter War, wherein despite an incredible, valiant defence, Finland was forced to sign a peace treaty in 1940, ceding its southeastern area. Tragically, Finland re-entered the Continuation War as a co-belligerent with Germany in 1941, hoping to regain its lost lands. It ended in 1944 with an armistice that cost Finland even more territory. After the dust settled, the focus, led by figures like the long-serving President Urho Kekkonen, was all about survival and sovereignty, and for decades during the Cold War, they pursued an active policy of neutrality. It was a careful balancing act that allowed Finland to thrive by trading with both the East and the West, famously hosting the 1975 Helsinki Conference. This clever navigation worked until the Soviet Union dissolved in the early 1990s. With that, Finland had new opportunities and finally anchored itself fully with the West, joining the European Union in 1995 after a national referendum. And most recently, as the geopolitical landscape changed dramatically again, Finland made one of its most monumental strategic pivots, letting go of its decades of non-alignment and officially joining NATO on April 4th, 2023. What a journey, right? But we're just getting started. Alright, so you were to see Finland on a map, you would immediately see it's one of the world's most northern and remote countries, tucked right up there in Northern Europe. It's an important part of the Nordic region, sharing land borders with Norway, Sweden, and its massive neighbour to the east, Russia. The south and southwest are edged by the Baltic Sea and the Gulf of Bothnia, creating a symbolic northern border between Western and Eastern Europe. Now, how big is this place? Finland is the sixth largest country in Europe, covering an area of over 338,000 square kilometres, or about 131,000 square miles. And its coastline, a staggering 4,600 kilometres, or about 2,760 miles, not even counting all the little inlets. Speaking of that coastline, let me tell you, it's incredible. The coast, particularly in the south, is absolutely studded with islands. We are talking about almost 180,000 small islands and rocky islets. This network, especially on the southwest corner, is so dense that it forms the incredible Finnish archipelago. Now let's talk about the land itself. Most of the country is low and surprisingly flat, though in the northwestern part you do see the Scandinavian mountains stretch in. But the real defining features: forests and lakes. These are mainly coniferous forests like pine and spruce, and they run right across the land. It's an impressive natural resource, and this landscape has been a primary source of inspiration for Finnish art, music and literature, from the national epic Kalevala to composers like John Sibelius. And then there are the lakes. The country isn't called the Land of 1,000 Lakes for nothing, though that nickname is a massive understatement. Finland actually has 187,888 lakes, and most of them lie in the southern half of the country. The scenery here is simply stunning. Forest, rock and water, where dark pine stands sharply against the sky with silver birch mixed in. This labyrinth of lakes, connected by short, rapid rivers, is a basin plateau where you can travel for days by boat into the country's very heart. So when you break Finland down geographically, you really have four main regions: the coastal archipelagos, especially in the south and southwest, the coastal plains that stretch from Russia to Sweden, which behind those rocky shores house Finland's oldest arable regions and most of the population, the stunning core region of lakes and deep forests in the centre and east, and finally, the vast northern region. This northern region is known as Lapland, and a huge part of it sits above the Arctic Circle. This is where the climate gets truly severe. At its northernmost reaches, this land of the midnight sun experiences nearly 2 months of continuous daylight in the summer, but also nearly 2 months of complete darkness during the winter polar night. This harsh climate is why, despite the Finns' deep connection to nature, the population is heavily concentrated in the southern third of the country. About 1/5 of Finland's total population lives in and around Helsinki, which is continental Europe's northernmost capital. Pretty fascinating how much the lakes and forests define the soul of this country, right? But this nature-loving nation also built one of the world's most progressive societies. So, let's move to politics and the economy. Before I give you the data, I want to share a fascinating fact. Finland has clinched the title of the world's happiest country for the 8th year in a row. Experts say this is largely thanks to their generous welfare state. Take a former video producer, Juho-Pekka Paloma. For example, he's been unemployed for a shocking 1,000 days. Yet he said he's grateful that in Finland there has been a safety net. That supported me. That social contract is clearly working on a human level. However, that safety net is now being trimmed back. Why? Because the population is ageing and the social costs are surging, straining public finances. This creates a huge political tightrope walk. How do you balance the need for fiscal stability with the beloved welfare state? This struggle shows that even the happiest place on earth is grappling with economic stagnation and rising joblessness. Speaking of, Finland's economy is sizable. Its GDP was $299.84 billion in 2024. But recently things have been tough. Real GDP declined by 0.9% in 2023, and after a small rebound in 2024, growth is projected to be very weak in 2025 at just 0.3%. Why so slow, you ask? Simple. Weak domestic demand, driven by low consumer confidence and rising joblessness, is the culprit. The unemployment rate for 2025 is expected to rise to 9.4%. But don't hit the panic button yet, because the long-term outlook is much brighter. Growth is expected to pick up to 1.3% in 2026, and then to 1.7% in 2027, and the unemployment rate is forecast to start falling during that time. Plus, inflation is under control, forecast at a manageable 1.8% for 2025. This recovery will be fueled by strong exports and, crucially, a return of domestic demand as new wage agreements improve purchasing power. So the short story is this. Finland is navigating major turbulence right now, balancing its vital welfare state against economic headwinds. But with strong long-term projections driven by a determined people, this happiest country on earth looks ready to weather the storm and get back to its steady, progressive pace. Now, what makes them the happiest country in the world? We are diving into that right now. If you remember from the last section, the land is dominated by forests and water, and that landscape is completely ingrained in the Finnish soul. This nature-centric worldview is the foundation for everything. Take, for instance, the sauna. This isn't just a thing people do, it has always been a part of Finnish culture. And to this day, many Finns visit the sauna at least once a week. Because to them, it's a physical, mental, and social cleanser. And it's non-negotiable. This connection to heritage and quality also shows up in their homes, where you'll often find domestically produced goods like Marimekko textiles and Itala glassware, which hold significant cultural worth. This deep sense of heritage fuels a quiet national pride, which comes from a deep history of overcoming odds, especially the wartime events of the early 1940s. Think about it. They rebuilt their agrarian country while paying off massive war reparations, a feat that instilled that famous quality known as Sisu, a kind of grim, determined stubbornness that gets the job done. This unique, resilient spirit is best seen in their art, starting with literature. Any discussion absolutely has to start with the Kalevala, the national epic. This incredible work, compiled by Elias Lönnrot in the mid-19th century from traditional folk songs, essentially defined the Finnish identity. Literary tradition continued with greats like Väinö Linna, whose novel The Unknown Soldier is so culturally significant that the movie based on it is shown annually on Independence Day. Moving on to music, the towering figure is composer Jean Sibelius, whom I mentioned earlier. His work is heard worldwide, and his most famous piece, Finlandia, is practically an honorary national anthem. And while classical music is a key part of the culture, Finland will always surprise you. They absolutely love the tango. Their version is emotionally charged and melancholic. And every year in Seinäjoki, the tango capital, they crown a king and queen. But if that wasn't enough, Finnish bands like Him, Nightwish, and Children of Bodom have achieved massive worldwide fame, bringing Finnish culture abroad in a massive, heavy metal package. All in all, the deep connection to the land, the quiet pride, the Sisu, and the blend of classical artistry with heavy metal modernity. That is the beautiful, unique, and slightly eccentric soul of Finland. It's their unique recipe for being the happiest people on Earth. Now, if you were to rock the Finnish spirit of Sisu in your own life's challenges, how would you do it? I'm curious to know what you think, so drop your comments down below. And as always, if you enjoyed this video, you'll love this next one.